When I was really young and coming to terms with my apostasy, I found allies within the left side of politics. Free thinkers, secularists, humanists, and people who generally wanted society free from bigotry, sectarianism, and extreme religious ideas. But as the years went by, and the left morphed into a Tumblr-influenced cult that was reminiscent of the very religions it sought to push back against, the new atheist movement and many others like that imploded. Ex-Muslims like myself were left in limbo, and the world slowly changed into what it is today. It's therefore not very surprising that those supporting Islamists today are none other than the left, especially in Western countries, the Red-Green Alliance as they're known. And together, I truly believe they represent a symbiotic but unique threat to Western civilization. And at the forefront of this troubling new alliance is none other than Nepo baby Hasan Piker and his orbiters, who might just be the new face of Islamist Apologia. Now, before we begin, if you're new here, let me give you a quick rundown of what Islam, as practiced in the vast majority of Muslim nations around the world, looks like, just so you can contextualize what I say in the video. Islam as a religion is absolute. Women are not equal to men under Islamic scripture. Apostasy gets punished by death or imprisonment and is currently practiced in a number of Muslim-majority countries. You do not have the freedom to practice your own religious beliefs as you do in a free Western state. And of course, historically and through its own scripture, non-Muslims, especially Christians and Jews, have been considered heretics and second-class citizens. And finally, gay rights are nothing but a fairy tale in these countries. What you see in the West from Muslims who grew up here, well, when engaging with non-Muslims and from apologists, are nothing but a whitewashed, perverted version of Islam that strays very far from what the religion actually teaches. Look, I personally don't think that's a bad thing, as it may finally allow apostates to live life without threats to their lives. Overall though, it's easily what people like Hasan would consider a fascist ideology, regardless of how politically incorrect that may sound. So, let's talk about how Hasan's worldview actually operates. He positions himself as an outspoken socialist, an anti-imperialist voice, someone who's supposedly driven by opposition to powerful nations and their interference in global affairs. So, the god of predators. Primarily, this means criticizing the United States, Israel, and their allies. On its surface, anti-imperialism isn't exactly a controversial stance. After all, criticizing powerful nations for foreign misadventures is something many rational people can get behind. But here's the issue. Hasan's anti-imperialism isn't universal. It's incredibly selective. When atrocities are committed by Islamist regimes or groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Taliban, Hasan immediately pivots to the language of resistance. To him, it's all justified blowback. He invokes this morally convenient lens to excuse the most brutal of acts, as long as these acts are committed by the oppressed against the perceived oppressor. This logic leads him to absurd places. Remember, this is a person who once infamously declared America deserved 9/11.
It's something that, people still bring all the time, but I don't really give a
because to Hasan, America's global footprint makes it morally culpable for essentially every act of violence directed towards it, even terrorist attacks targeting innocent civilians. When Hamas fighters women, kidnapped children, and attacked on October 7th, Hasan's immediate response was not condemnation, but deflection, casting it as an inevitable reaction to Israeli occupation. But here's where I think his intellectual dishonesty really kicks in. The absolute refusal to apply universal human rights standards to Islamist groups and regimes. He does know who he's defending, right? The very same values Hasan claims to champion are conveniently ignored or downplayed when they clash with Islamist ideologies. Women being subjugated under Sharia law, gays and apostates being jailed or facing the capital punishment. None of this seems to faze Hasan if the perpetrators align themselves against America or Israeli interests. It almost seems as if he's willing to sacrifice the Western sphere at the altar of Islamic imperialism, which ironically his ancestors were neck deep in, as long as he gets to one-up the opposing side. It reinforces a deeply troubling message. As long as you position yourself as anti-American or anti-Israel, your human rights abuses can be overlooked, justified, or even celebrated. Hasan's brand of anti-imperialism is ultimately less about fighting injustice and more about scoring ideological points against the West, even if it means cozying up to the very worst that humanity has to offer. This is where we arrive at Islamic apologia. You know, what people like the Muhammad hidubbz and other dawah bros of the world do. Hasan, although seemingly from a Muslim background, is a self-professed secularist, which, if we're being charitable, should mean he sees through the smoke and mirrors of religious dogma. But Hasan's secularism has a fascinating, almost magical quality to it. It completely vanishes when it comes to Islam. This is quite evident in the fact that Islam's role in all the organizations he loves to promote and defend are virtually never mentioned. It should be rather obvious to anybody, especially considering anti-Semitism and propaganda are rather widespread in the Islamic world, and he's surrounded himself with orbiters who are even more overt in the Islamic apologia. Take Frogan, a prominent moderator and collaborator, who openly joked about baking a 9/11 themed cake, because nothing screams secularism and progressive values like celebrating a terrorist attack on civilians. When people criticized this, Hasan leapt to her defense, arguing that the only reason anyone had an issue with the joke was because Frogan wears a hijab.
I guess you can only make edgy jokes if you're not a hijabi woman, you know?
You heard that right. Criticizing a 9/11 joke is apparently bigotry now, as long as the joke is told by someone wearing Islamic headwear. And then there's the hilarious irony of it all. Hasan positions himself as the left's firebrand against religious extremism when it's Christian. But the moment Islam enters the chat, he morphs into a guardian of religious feelings. He resorts to identity politics so blatant, it would make Tumblr blush. The secular, atheist, leftist suddenly hiding behind the hijab of religion the second it becomes politically convenient. This tactic is textbook Islamist apologia. By framing every criticism of Islam or Muslims like Frogan as bigotry or imperialist propaganda, Hasan effectively shields Islamists from scrutiny and reinforces their narrative of victimhood. He may not practice Islam himself, but he's built a cozy echo chamber for those who do. The irony is rich. The left, historically a bastion for feminism, gay rights, secularism, and free speech, now aligning with conservative Islamists who reject every single one of those values. And Hasan, the self-declared secular socialist, right in the middle of it all, apologizing, excusing, and enabling. Secularism, Hasan style. All religions are equal, but some religions are more equal than others. Now, you may ask, okay, but what's the problem? Well, as one of the biggest streamers on the internet, all this propaganda is now spilling out into the real world. Hasan's brand of apologetics is having a tangible impact on public opinion, especially among Gen Z audiences. Recent surveys reveal younger demographics in Western countries increasingly sympathizing with Hamas and adopting pro-resistance stances in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Ironically, the generation most vocal about social justice and human rights is now embracing groups whose main achievement involves human rights abuses at Olympic levels. Well done, Hasan. Truly stunning and brave. But it doesn't stop there. Take a stroll through any Western university campus these days, and you're likely to hear chants like "from the river to the sea," a slogan that conveniently omits what happens to Israelis caught between that river and the sea. Or how about the Haiba chants echoing through Western cities? Chants with a history Islamists would rather you didn't look into, but you can in this video I made. You might expect major platforms like Twitch, owned by the multi-billion-dollar behemoth Amazon, to step in at some point. Yet, their moderation is minimal at best. Twitch executives seem perfectly content watching their star political streamer rant about terrorism as justified resistance, massacres as understandable blowback, and human rights abuses as anti-colonial struggles. Yet another example of the red-green alliance embedded at every level of Western institutions. And this is why I think you should hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because voices like mine are often buried or hidden on platforms like this, especially if it goes against mainstream leftist politics. Of course, Hasan's tactics aren't exactly groundbreaking. History is packed with examples of leftist intellectuals tripping over themselves to excuse the inexcusable. as long as it fits their political narrative. Remember the New Left in the 1970s? They famously stood behind organizations like the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, and the IRA, romanticizing their violence as necessary liberation tactics, conveniently ignoring innocent victims in the process. Then there were the esteemed Western intellectuals who rationalized away the Khmer Rouge's genocidal slaughter as just a rough phase on the road to communist utopia. Mere growing pains, apparently. And here we are again, history repeating itself. Hasan's Islamic Apologia is just the latest chapter in the age-old tradition of leftist intellectuals, bending morality into pretzels to rationalize brutality. Different decade, same delusion. Now, at this point, someone like Hasan and his supporters will inevitably respond with a predictable defense. Oh, but I'm just defending Palestine. Nice try, but no. Criticizing Israel's policies or advocating for Palestinian rights isn't the issue here. Plenty of rational, morally consistent people manage to stand firmly against injustice without resorting to defending terror groups, celebrating acts of violence, or conveniently turning a blind eye to human rights abuses committed by Islamist regimes. The problem with Hasan isn't his support for Palestinians. It's his chronic willingness to justify, rationalize, or outright ignore brutality, as long as that brutality is packaged within suitably anti-Western or anti-Israeli rhetoric. Supporting Palestine doesn't mean endorsing Hamas, just as criticizing US foreign policy doesn't require praising Al-Qaeda. Yet, Hasan continually blends these lines, painting groups like Hamas and Hezbollah as morally justified resistance, regardless of the atrocities they commit. And of course, whenever this topic arises, we hear the inevitable defense. Oh no, but I don't hate Jews, I just hate Zionists. But let's be brutally honest, this claim falls apart quicker than Hasan's arguments when confronted with basic logic. The past 18 months alone have demonstrated clearly that what starts as anti-Zionism frequently slips into blatant anti-Semitism. Hasan's highly public feud with Ethan Klein, or H3H3, illustrates exactly how hollow that distinction is in practice. Today, Ethan is no longer an ally or friend, but just another enemy Zionist, deserving of ridicule and accusations of racism. So much so, Hasan's biggest allies, some truly reprehensible scumbags, are fine sending human skulls to H3. The fact that Ethan, a secular and progressive Jew, could so swiftly become a target highlights precisely how this rhetoric functions in reality, as a thin cover for old-fashioned Jew hatred. The idea that people like Hasan simply oppose Zionism and not Jews themselves becomes laughably absurd when Jewish critics are systematically silenced, demonized, or written off as Zionist operatives. The Ethan Klein debacle proves this beyond doubt. Anti-Zionism is too often the Trojan horse that anti-Semitism uses to slip unnoticed into the mainstream. But perhaps the saddest part is how little someone like Hasan truly understands the forces he's legitimizing. I've lived in an Islamic country. I grew up under Islamic laws, surrounded by true believers who weren't shy about their vision for the world. I saw firsthand what genuine religious extremism looks like, what it demands, and how it views the freedoms that Hasan enjoys and takes for granted. From my perspective, it's baffling and honestly tragic to see Western progressives lining up behind ideologies that would gladly dismantle every liberty they claim to value. Hasan might think he's scoring points against Western imperialism, but in reality, he's emboldening the very ideology countless people flee from every year, risking their lives for a sliver of the freedoms he casually dismisses. I know this because I've lived it. I've heard the whispers behind closed doors, felt the stifling fear of speaking your truth, and witnessed how quickly tolerance crumbles when religious dogma rules. If we allow ourselves to forget these lessons, if we ignore history and experience in favor of cheap ideological victories, we risk waking up one day in a world none of us recognize. And by then, it may be too late to reclaim the freedom we so carelessly surrendered, chasing shadows of justice until we lost sight of what justice truly means. Hey, you made it to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and give it a thumbs up. A massive thank you to my channel members and Patreon supporters. You are the backbone of this work. Want to join the crew? Hit the join button below or swing by Patreon. I'd love to have you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.